Hi, I'm Dan, this is our Midlife Crisis Motorcyclist, and this is the BMW F900GS. I was supposed to get in for a review before, but then accidentally got distracted by a slightly glitzier R1300GS instead. These things happen. And that is of course the Voge DS900X, which I've been running on the channel for the last few months, and shares an engine with the BMW, if not a price point. That's because the Voge starts at just over 9 grand, and the starting price on the F900GS is more like 12 grand. Or, if you want one that looks like that, more like 16 grand. So what on earth does BMW do to justify the extra money, given it's got the same engine? Well, we'll get to that, but first, to clear up a possible confusion, the Voge is absolutely not a kind of rebadged version of the GS, nor is it a sort of Chinese copy or knockoff. The only thing these two bikes actually share is that Loncin-built 895cc parallel twin, and the fact that they're very much built to the same kind of modern-day mid-size adventure bike template, and both of them have larger 21-inch front wheels and long travel suspension, putting them very much at the more adventure-y end of the spectrum. But 7 grand is an awful lot of extra money for a bike which is basically built to do the same thing as the Voge, isn't it? Let's also look at what the Voge gives you as standard and BMW makes you pay extra for. I don't want to labour the point, but let's just go over some of the things that you get on the Voge. So you get cruise control, you get a heated seat, you get tyre pressure monitoring, you get radar blind spot alerts, you get a quick shifter, engine protection bars, centre stand, and loads more besides. You also get, on the one I've been testing, the free luggage, which is a very nice extra to have. That is now a cost option on the model year 25 version of the Voge, but it's still quite a reasonably priced one. What about the BMW? What does that give you for the extra money, other than being, you know, a BMW? Well, you get a bit of extra power for starters, so it's 105 horsepower rather than the 95 of the Voge. You also get more sophisticated electronics, so it's got proper cornering, ABS and traction control. It has BMW's super neat integrated rider electronics, so you've got the TFT screen and the interaction through the nifty kind of turn and push dial that I was enjoying on the big GS just recently. It's got a generally higher level of fit and finish, and all the details, all the bits are just a bit nicer than what you get on the Voge. You also get, as an example of that, a nice a branded titanium exhaust, which is a nice thing to have as well. This particular bike benefits from even more extras as well, so that includes the Enduro Pro package, which has these beefier 45mm Showa forks on the front and a fully adjustable ZF shock at the rear. It's got some extra rider modes. It has the kind of clip-in navigation system as well, which sits above the TFT screen, and again is fully integrated into the bike's electronics. So that's all pretty neat. I've got to say, in this particular guise, the bike looks every inch the properly serious off-road adventure bike as well. To my eyes, it is properly gnarly. Is it worth the extra money though? Well, let's go and find out. Right, so let's give this F900GS a little bit of a go and find out what it's all about. I thought, you know, given it's looks like a proper off-road bike, I'd give it a little run around the local lanes. Nothing too extreme, but enough to just kind of test the theory about what looks like a pretty serious off-road bike. A lot more serious than I am probably capable of, but nothing ventured, nothing gained. I've got it in the Enduro mode, which turns off the traction control and the rear ABS, sets the bike up for riding off-road, because obviously you don't want traction control, because once that rear wheel spins up, just cuts the power and you end up going nowhere. Now, I'm going to try not to fixate too much on those comparisons with the Voge, so let's just get the The one thing that they do share, let's just look at that first of all, that being the engine, of course. Now, no great surprises because it is literally the same engine. It doesn't have a huge amount of difference from the Voge, other than that extra 10 horsepower or so. You know, it's got the same characteristics. It's a very modern parallel twin. It's got a, you know, predictable linear power delivery. It's not what you'd call charismatic. Gets the job done. I think it probably does sound a little bit ruder through that fancy titanium can. I'd say perhaps the fueling is just a little bit smoother. The Voge did suffer a little bit, you know, at low speeds and traffic and things like that. There was a little bit of kind of chunter on and off the throttle, but the BMW seems a little bit slicker, which is kind of what you'd expect, isn't it? And the gearbox and everything is much the same as well, so unsurprisingly, engine-wise it feels very familiar indeed, but the rest of the bike is quite a lot different. And it's also very different from the R1300GS that I've been riding recently. This feels like a, well, it feels like a proper off-road bike. Just from the moment you sling a leg over it. I mean, you get that from the looks, obviously, but you know, it's got those more serious tyres. It's got the full 230mm suspension travel, so it's got a lot more suspension. It's got that kind of rally style bench seat. It's quite tall, 870mm in the saddle, so it definitely, it looks like it means business, and when you ride it, it feels like it means business as well, so, which is very different from the big GS, which is obviously the kind of, you know, the do-it-all bike. As I found out with the 1300, you know, you can scratch it along the lanes, it's quite chuckable. That's a bike built to do anything, whereas this feels a little more singular in its ambitions. I'll just have to concentrate down here a little bit because it is pretty bumpy and pretty greasy, but that long travel suspension seems to be dealing with that pretty nicely. Pretty confidence inspiring, remembering some of the tricks I learnt on that Honda off-road day. You know, use the engine braking, use the back brake rather than the front, stay centered in the bike, stand up. It's very different from road riding. You've got to let the bike move around a little bit underneath you, get used to that. It's very different on a big heavy enduro bike like this, you know, over 200 kilos, as opposed to the, you know, little lightweight 150 kilos or so of the Hondas we were riding, but much of the same applies. There we go, safely through that. So yeah, as I was saying, where the 1300 GS is the bike that kind of, if you say GS to people, that's what they picture, isn't it? And in some ways I think this 900 and the 850 that it was built from, they're almost like the forgotten GS models, aren't they? They're kind of there in the BMW range, but they don't have that sort of mass following. You don't see that many of them around either, do you? But I think if you were serious about your off-roading and adventuring, this is definitely the GS you'd pick. It's got that bigger 21-inch front wheel, the suspension travel, just the looks and the kind of relative lightness and chuckability compared with the big one. All relative. But there's just little signs throughout the bike that this has been built and developed by people who intend for it to be used properly off-road. So little things like the adjustable gear selector. So one thing I found when riding bikes standing up is that it's quite difficult to hook your foot under the gear selector when you stood up, and especially when you're in big stiff enduro boots like the ones I've got on today. So it's really important to be able to adjust that, raise that gear selector so you can get your foot underneath it. And you can do that on this bike straight out of the box. And again, that's just a little sign that the people engineering this bike, they have a clear idea of what this bike's meant to be used for. In that way, it feels a bit more like the Desert X does to the Multistrada. You know, if the Multistrada's like the big GS, this feels more like the Desert X in terms of its focus, and I preferred the Desert X to the Multistrada. I think, although it was intimidating in its kind of rawness, just that kind of purity of purpose and the kind of no-nonsense functional vibe just felt a bit more appealing. Clearer in its ambitions, perhaps. Maybe it's because I'm a mountain biker. I see, you know, knobbly tyres, long travel suspension, things like that, and just I feel a little bit more comfortable in my kind of comfort zone. But yeah, these kind of proper off-road bikes, I guess the thing is, if it's a bit like crossovers and SUVs, isn't it? It's like kind of Range Rovers to Land Rover Defenders. Do you want to have something that kind of poses as an off-roader, or do you want something that actually is an off-roader? And I think, to my mind, that's why these bikes are a little more appealing. They're more comfortable in their own skin. Yes, they're perhaps a little bit more compromised in their road manners, but you know, like a sports bike is built for lap times and the track as much as anything, this has a similar sense of focus, just for a very different discipline. And I find that easier to get my head around. And certainly on the road, I've done quite a few miles on the bike already up to this point, and it's perfectly fine on the road. It's upright, it's comfortable, the suspension's obviously really good at swallowing the bumps, but you know, you don't chuck it into the turns with that big front wheel. You just kind of go with the flow and take in the views and maybe take the road less travelled. Other things that are good about the bike and perhaps justify that kind of premium billing and that premium price. Well, I'm a big fan of BMW's interface. This is one of the things, you know, this bike has the same engine as the Voge, a cheap Chinese adventure bike, but the kind of quantifiable stuff you get from buying from a big brand like BMW is in the kind of the way you interact with the bike. So this kind of nifty thumb wheel here, that operates both the main screen here and the additional clip-in nav unit that I've got there. And it's just really slick in its integration. Very easy to get your head around. And it just works. And that's the kind of stuff that, it's the same in cars, isn't it? It's the stuff that the legacy brands, that's where their experience shows, and whereas a kind of an ownership proposition, you're getting that extra sense of quality and polish. Because that's what it comes down to with bikes, isn't it? You can get a bike to do a job, and as the Voge demonstrates, you can get a bike to do a very similar job to this for a lot less money, but where the kind of less quantifiable stuff like brand and things like that start coming in, BMW's long experience of making bikes like this, and its resources and its all the rest, that's where it begins to show. And I think where you get a sense of where that extra money goes. Just have to take it steady around here, it's a bit greasy. Concentrate for a moment. That's one of the things that riding without ABS on the rear, especially when you've got big stiff boots on, it's quite difficult to sense when the rear wheel's locking up. Kind of the first clue you get that that's happening is the bike starts sliding around, which I'm sure if you're more experienced at riding off-road is, you know, something you're well used to, but can feel a little bit alarming when you've not got so much experience. But the bike is well up to the job. I'm not sure if I am, but the bike definitely is. Anyway, so there we go. Quick overview of the F900 GS. Now if you'll excuse me, I'm going to get on with the ride. So there you go, a little bit of wobbly off-roading with a slightly nervous noob on a F900 GS, but you know, given the way the bike looks, I felt I had to get a little bit of mud on the tyres just to kind of test the concept and see if it really is the off-road bike it presents as. I'm guessing it probably is. Didn't really get much of a taste of it on the stuff I was doing today, but if I was a little bit more confident and had a bit more practice, then yeah, I reckon I could probably do some pretty serious off-roading on this bike. Overall, what do I think? Well, as a standalone bike, setting aside the whole Voge thing for a second, I think the F900 GS is really appealing for the fact that it's kind of, well, it's kind of a forgotten bike in the BMW range, and it's, whereas the 1300 GS gets all the attention and it's a very obvious choice for its looks, its status, the big boxer engine, all the gadgetry, the active suspension, all those kind of things, and the huge range of things you could do on it, tour, bit of light off-road, all that kind of stuff. You know, that is kind of the halo bike in the BMW range, and this just kind of sits in the corner a little bit quietly. And yeah, it's a deliberate choice, this bike. You'd have to really want this bike to own it, and I think that's pretty cool. I think that does set it apart a little bit, and as a piece of design in its own right. I've said it before, I'm not the biggest adventure bike fan, but this one just looks cool. You can see it in all the detailing in the parts that are used on it and all that kind of thing. It has a real sense of purpose, and it's very obviously a properly premium bike. Premium enough to justify that £7,000 over the Voge I was riding before, and for the fact that it shares the same engine with that bike. Are you really getting that extra value over a bike that does pretty much the same job. You need to put some proper tyres on the Voge, maybe make a couple of other little tweaks, but basically you could do the same stuff on the Voge that you could do on this, just with a slightly less fancy badge. Well, I think you have to look at it kind of objectively and then subjectively. Objectively, you can see that this is a more premium bike. You can just tell in all the little details, every last little fixture and fitting, the quality of the components, the slickness of the interface between the connected navigation unit, all that kind of stuff. It's just a kind of, you get on this bike and you just know it's been built by people who've done this before, and you know they've got a lots of experience doing it. And you know, if you've been riding for a long time, if you know BMWs, you'll be very much in your happy place on this bike and feel confident that it will take you as far as you want to go. Whether that's worth the extra money over the Voge, subjectively, that again, it kind of overlaps, doesn't it? You know, does the brand matter? Does that BMW's kind of experience and all that sort of thing matter to you enough to spend the extra money? It's also more expensive than a lot of the kind of more established competition, like a Suzuki V-Strom DE or any number of other mid-size adventure bikes as well. So you have to really want all that BMW stuff to swallow that extra money. Going the other way, you could look at it as a cheaper alternative to something like a Ducati Desert X, which is also, you know, at the more serious end in terms of kind of off-road ability of the kind of modern adventure bike spectrum. So in that sense, it kind of does everything that a Desert X could do for a lot less money. It's a little bit more manageable and smaller as well into the bargain. Not that much slower really in terms of its performance, maybe a little bit, but you know, not enough that you'd really be too bothered. So yeah, it's an interesting conundrum, isn't it? I'd really like to hear your thoughts, whether BMW does justify the extra money over the Voge with which it shares an engine, or it doesn't. Let's have a chat in the comments. I'd really love to hear your views. So it is. Hopefully you liked the video. If you did, please hit like. If you're not subscribed to the channel already, please do so. Plenty more coming up. And for now, I'll say goodbye. Thanks for watching and ride safe.